Welcome to the Pastor to Pioneer podcast. This is a space where we have honest conversations about the insights and stories on the journey from pastor to pioneer. I'm your host, Britton Smith. Whether you are a pastor feeling stuck and burdened by the prevailing model, dreaming of another way, or you're taking steps towards pioneering a disciple-making and simple church movement, we hope this podcast reminds you that you're not crazy, you're not alone. Well, you know what often happens after people start wrestling through all the foundational things that need to shift, then the natural question, right, is, well, what do I do? I mean, especially if you are in the prevailing model, and we work with a lot of pastors, that's the question they're asking. Okay, I got to make some changes. And we've found that there are three major routes or paths people take when they want to step into some disciple-making movements. They start getting convicted that things need to change. And those three are like transition your whole church or blow it up. 2, hybrid, which we'll talk about all these in a minute. And the third one is to pioneer, be sent out like a pioneer to start a new work. So I would love to talk more about each one of those, what it looks like to step into each of those routes, and even bring in the conversation that we just had about the foundations on why those are challenging in light of the foundation conversation. So you want to start, just like talk us through like what typically, when you talk about the blow it up or transition one, what is that?
Yeah, you're gonna find somebody typically more apostolic, oftentimes, who's going to be very discontent with their status quo. And when I mean status quo, I mean their traditional church environment, setup, whatever's going on there, and they're going to be like, and then they hear of this other path to go and walk down, and they're going to be like, I'm just going to blow this up. They're going to have an expectation that people are going to come with them from what they are blowing up, and they're going to go and engage in this new decentralized, simple church, disciple-making endeavor. And what's really challenging about that is, well, for one, I wouldn't say that this is like the most common thing that pastors will first go and think about.
Yeah, right.
There are a few. We've worked with a few who this is what they've chosen to do. Or I would say my general encouragement is don't do this. There is a caveat there. The caveat is God gets to be God. So if God tells you to do it, you have to go do it. But in just a general wisdom sense, we're not encouraging people, hey, go blow up your church in order to start doing this.
There's a number of reasons why that is. And I think one of the biggest ones is because most of the people in your church don't have the conviction that there is something foundationally broken. They don't believe that there's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. So they could say, yeah, we could maybe make disciples better, we could empower people better, but they're not seeing the depth of what's broken, and therefore they don't have the same level of conviction most of the time as the pastor, or whoever it is that is just driving this change. And so therefore, you're going to start making fundamental foundational shifts, and people are like, whoa, what are you doing here? This is so extreme.
Yep. Yeah, typically the pastors that are trying to lead the charge on that have an overinflated perspective of how many people will actually journey with them. And so even on a conservative side, some pastors will think, well, even if half of the people come with me on this, and we're typically like, when you get a couple steps down the road, just get ready for like 1 to 3%. And that's an eye opener. Because in a big reason that we encourage people to really not do this is not only because, well, at the end of it, so few people end up really journeying with you from this. Most of the people end up going and finding some other form of church.
Yep.
You know what I mean? They just go find a different church. But what happens is typically the pastor who is doing this really loves these people. And then you've taken an important part of their world and you've just thrown it into chaos. And then that leader, that pastor, spends a lot of time basically dealing with the carnage that you've created rather than actually getting to live into the very movement that you're hoping to see.
Yeah.
So there's just a piece in that it's like, if the Lord tells you to do it, go ahead and do it. But this, in just a general wisdom sense, is generally not the play.
Well, and I think we try to shoot straight with this because we want, like the Bible says, to count the cost. And so we're like, you should obey Jesus. But if you're going to obey him in doing this transition, it's helpful to know what the cost likely is going to be for you to count that cost before you do it.
Yes.
And I think that's the reality. What you said is so true, man. Like every pastor I know, we are so optimistic that we've been through so much together. They followed me thus far. Why wouldn't they follow me into this? And that's a sobering statistic of 1 to 3%. But we found that across the board, and we found in a lot of cases that maybe there'll be more than that initially make that transition. But typically, at about the 1 year mark, most of the people that made that transition initially aren't there anymore.
Yeah. Because in general, people love the thought of this in theory. It's an extremely appealing thing in theory, but in practice, it is actually challenging, and it costs us, similar to the foundations conversation we were having, to turn away from a lot of things that have just been ingrained in us. And man, when there's a lot of churches around a given city, it's hard to turn away from those things to go live this out when, even if the church you loved is blown up by the pastor, there's another 50 to 200 churches around that'll offer you something very similar.
Well, so I've had the privilege of doing all three of these
Yes.
at different times. Started with a hybrid. We didn't know that's what it was at first, and then went into transitioning in light of COVID and what came out of that. And then I ended up stepping away in the summer of 2021. So I mean, I've done all three of these, and I, I think you're right in that, like, uh, people don't know what they don't know, and it sounds great on paper, and they know they should, likely, especially if they see it in the word. Okay, I see it's not measuring up. But even in my case, we lost most of the church when we tried to make this transition because people didn't think anything was broken. But even the elders, like godly folks, just like seeking the Lord, were like, this is what God's saying for us to do. But when it came to now we are going to stop doing the things that we love, that's when the pain really started. So you can add things all you want. Like, yeah, we're going to if you keep doing what you're doing, which is a hybrid, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can keep doing what you want. But the minute you say, okay, we're going to stop doing these things because it gives competing messages, it takes all this time and energy, we're going to stop this. So when we stopped me preaching every Sunday, or anybody for that matter, we stopped the worship in that manner. People are like, whoa, 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 what's going on? Even though we've talked about it ahead of time, once you actually experience that loss, then it's like it just becomes more real, and it's just too big of a jump. I mean, even the best intended people, it is such a big jump to go
Hmm.
from a prevailing church model
Correct.
into something that looks nothing like that.
Yeah. And not only that, but when you blow it up, you don't immediately step into this really beautiful, robust version of what you want to see.
It's true.
So it'd be one thing if all of a sudden, laid at your feet was a really healthy version of it, but that's not there. It has yet to still be created. So you're asking people to abandon something that has been their norm for all of life. And you're asking them not to jump into a polished version of simple church decentralized work. You're asking them to enter into a journey. And most of them just don't want that journey. And so it's a really hard pill to swallow. A lot of people think they want the journey. They will say yes to it. They will even go and start taking a few steps. But a lot of people will hit their limit somewhere along the way, and we'll end up going and just finding another traditional church.
Well, and I think that's when some of these foundational issues really get exposed. Even if you don't think they're there, no, no, I don't have any of these issues in my own heart. We don't have this in our church. Our church doesn't have this bad foundation. We're good. But when you get squeezed and things get hard, that's when I think you often start seeing what's really there. And maybe I do like a little bit of comfort. I like a little bit of discomfort, but only to a point. Now, I'm clinging to what is comfortable for me, or I don't like to have this all be on me. I like to have someone do a lot of the work for me, or whatever it may be. Or the consumer, I like worship a certain way. I miss certain things, and I think that's an okay thing. And I think that's one thing I wish I would have done differently is recognizing the extent of the loss that people were facing and feeling and helping them grieve that. And just saying, those, we enjoyed those together. That's true. Yeah, we are losing those. And let's grieve those together to say goodbye to them, press into what's next. So I think if you are to go this route, it's just so slow. It's not only that most people won't come in the end, it's way slower than you think because you're dealing with people and their loss and their emotion and helping them take steps. It is a gut-wrenching journey. And I don't know of anyone that's made this step or transition that's people said that they're glad they did it because that's what Jesus asked them to do, but no one's going, yeah, most of my church came along.
Yeah, or this was a really great idea. No, most of the for those who did it and they're actually glad they did it, it was because we did what God told us to do.
Yep.
Yeah. And this gets into why the second one typically is on it. It's the most popular one. We're seeing a lot of different churches go and begin to approach this, flirt with this, even start to step into it. And whereas that first one is the blow it up, the second one is what we would consider the hybrid. And this is such a natural consideration for people because you're like, we have this thing that's already established. We put a lot of work into it. There's even some good things happening in the midst of it. How do we hang on to this and go and attach this other movement-based stuff approach? Most people won't call it a program. They wouldn't say a movement-based program. That wouldn't be the language they would use. But they try to figure out how do we mash these two worlds together.
Yeah.
And in that, I think it's important to know that when we talk about hybrid, we realize there's going to be 1,000 different variations of exactly how hybrid gets expressed. There's not just one or two or three. Every pastor and church is going to try to be massaging their version of what works for them and for their people. Before I jump into more on that, any
No, I think you mentioned this. This is the natural first step most people want to take. And I think because a lot of people can see how challenging the transition would be for the whole church and how it feels like, well, if we'll just start doing this on the side and then we'll figure out what to do with it. We'll just do this together and they can coexist. They can work together. We don't have to stop one to do the other. That's too big of a jump. And so it sounds great on paper. It sounds great for the people. It sounds great for the pastor because shoot, I can still do my job and I can have the best of both worlds. But the reality is that's about where it stays is looking good on paper. And in reality, it inevitably always leads to an explosion, a disaster.
Yeah, there tends to be a life cycle. And a big reason that there is a life cycle because a lot of people are engaging with a hybrid. They tend to step into a hybrid because either they don't think there's something wrong or broken with the existing system.
Yep.
And so they don't see any need to go into change that or alter that or step away from it or whatever. And so there's no need to change it there. So then they just add them on together. And a lot of people are they try to figure out how do we get these things to work together. And there's a life cycle that tends to be a lot of churches are rather visionless. Mm-hmm. So then the vision of movement, disciple making movement, decentralized simple churches, how that can impact a city, neighborhoods, even a state, stuff like that. It's a beautiful vision. Mm-hmm. And people will hear this vision and they'll get captivated by it. And naturally in their hearts, they'll be like, we want this. And then from sharing the vision, typically that's a pastor or so who's really, of course, up front sharing the vision. There will be opportunities to come in and to train. How do we actually go and we do this? And so you'll infuse a lot of trainings and people will come to those trainings. And you'll see an uptick in some fruit actually. Because people will take pieces of training and go and begin to implement it with some friends and with some family. And you might see some more baptisms. You might even see some groups start around
Yep.
you.
Oh yeah.
But what ends up happening over time from there, just a little bit, is the realization that these two systems do not actually utilize each other for greater movement and momentum. They actually compete against each other.
That's huge realization.
Yeah. Because and there's a few reasons that they do compete against each other. One is because a movement that's truly going to move is going to have to turn away from a lot of those foundational issues
Yeah.
that we were addressing earlier
Yep.
in order to truly find healthy movement.
Yep.
And as it has to break away from those, it begins to almost combat them and to compete against them. And so over time now, you don't have like this symbiotic relationship between these two
Yeah.
things and they're thriving together. People have limited time and energy. And now they're starting to realize, man, well, if I'm going to really put my time and energy into something, it's going to be one or the other.
I think that's I don't overlook that. I see that all the time. Is we're spending all this time and energy of like, yeah, we want these are going to complement. So you're spending all the time trying to figure out how they complement without realizing they really don't. And one of the major ways that they don't complement is purely, as you said, by time. And the thing that I've seen over and over again is people are like, oh, I'm going to do both. I'm going to hold them both. So I'm going to be a part of both, invest myself in both. Well, you only have so much of your own time and energy and life to give. So I've seen it so often that all of a sudden the kids stop showing up to the gathering, the house church, or the simple church, or then the parents come, or maybe the family comes, but they're tired, or they're in and out. They're just not in there as often. And when pressed, they just say, yeah, we just have had a long day. We went to church at the big church this morning, and now we're trying to do this afternoon. We've got other things to do. We've got homework. We're tired. We poured ourselves out there. It's just like, and I don't blame them. Like, that is a really hard thing to balance. Uh, and when those things are pulled, that gravitational pull back to the prevailing model is so strong. And we typically are going to find that path of least resistance,
Yep.
which is going to be where I can just sit and
Yeah.
catch my breath.
Catch my breath. And so even along with that is another element which we see creep up from time to time. It actually almost happens in every instance, but it might just happen at a different time, is you'll have leadership that'll be very much in favor of the movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, once that stuff begins to emerge and starts to take place, all of a sudden somebody who has some form of power within the centralized church, the traditional church, has an issue with it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how one person can all of a sudden create a huge barrier. It's one big donor to the traditional church does not like the fact that these high school kids are going to baptize their friends. They're supposed to bring them to church, and they get really mad about it. Or there's one elder who's like, I think all these people out here, I'm really scared that they're losing something by not coming back and hearing teaching from our great pastor,
Mm-hmm.
whoever that is. It only takes one voice in a lot of those instances to also really create a huge issue in both of those worlds.
Which that just exposes that bad foundation, right? Of cash needing, if the money speaks, of control, of centralization, like that really gets exposed. It doesn't take many people to expose that, but that's there, and that will crush a movement.
So it's unique. We've gotten to work now with people who do this throughout the United States and North America, but also with people who do this globally.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've gotten to talk with people who have studied more movements around the world that would be similar to what we're talking about. And there's a gentleman who I asked this to who has studied these greatly. And I just said, hey, how many of the movements around the world do you know are actually like from a hybrid expression? And he told me zero. And there's a lot of them. I mean, right now there's attention being given to about 2,000. And so to yes,
Okay.
2,000 now that was a number from a while ago. I couldn't give you the current number, but the fact that there's 2,000 of such around the world, and somebody who's devoted a lot of his time and energy and life to actually researching this, and I asked him specifically, hey, how many of these do you know have come from a hybrid expression? And he just says zero. Says something.
It does.
Now, um, for us, then I think there's a broken-hearted piece also because in the hybrid expression, then people give a lot of time and energy to trying to figure it out
Yes.
because you want both to work. You
Yep.
want both to work.
Yep.
It is the natural inclination of us as pastors and all this stuff to be like, how do I make
Well, and I think part of it is like a lot of the things that we have experienced in the prevailing model, we can attach significant, meaningful times and impact in our lives.
Yep.
And so we're looking at these things like, man, to get rid of all these things, I can point to this time and this sermon or this, like, there's deep meaning attached to it. So I understand that sentiment of like, can we do both?
Yeah, yeah. And we found though that it typically takes anywhere from about 3 to even as many as 5 years for a church to realize this hybrid thing that we had great expectations for
Yeah.
is not working.
Yeah.
And so you potentially have a huge loss of time.
Mm-hmm.
But even harder than the time, quite frankly, is because those two worlds tend to clash against each other. Those aren't just models that are clashing. Those are people
Yeah, that's right.
who are trying to hold to those models who begin clashing.
Mm-hmm.
So you have people now who had been in church together and all such, and were locked. They had locked arms together and such, and now they are actually combating against each other in a certain
Mm-hmm.
regard. And that's actually a really hard thing. These people who love each other, who are now wrestling with each other.
Yeah.
It's really hard to see
Hard. It's hard.
movement take place from that mentality. It's actually hard to even have centralized work that feels like it's happening well when you have that. And ultimately, the pastor or leader or leaders, they end up taking their foot off the gas pedal of one of them at the expense or they'll put their foot on the gas of one more so at the expense of the other.
Yeah.
And so you'll see people all of a sudden begin to revert back way more towards, oh man, we need to give more time and energy towards the centralized version of things. That typically is the case just because the gravitational pull is so strong back that way that people are like, oh, man, this has been too much for the people. It's been so hard. We're gonna pull back from this a little bit in order to kind of hunker back down,
Well, I would even say like even if you don't intentionally put the gas down on one and at the expense of the other, that just naturally was what happens. I mean, for so long, and this is not just my own story, but I know a lot of pastors, they try to figure out like, okay, how do I keep doing what I'm doing, but scale it back to free up more time to pour into this? Like, why can't I just even me do both? And even if the church isn't going to fully come on board, why can't I even go out and do this? And that Sunday morning thing or Saturday morning thing or whatever you meet, whatever day that is, it comes week after week after week.
Comes quick.
And all the programming around it,
Yeah.
and all the volunteers around it, and all the problems around it, and all the demands around it, and all the demands of the people around that, it by very nature will suck time and attention. And it's not only that, it's the brain space, it's the heart space. It's like it's so hard to be involved in both of those because these things they're always just around the corner in the centralized service, So I think sometimes it's intentional. You're gonna like, oh, okay, we're gonna put gas in this, put brakes on this. Sometimes it just by very nature of what's required to maintain the machine, it just is gonna take most of the gas.
Yeah. And a lot of pastors are scared in the midst of launching those two things, of taking some of your best potential leaders for the centralized work. that will typically be, the bread and butter for
Yeah.
that church.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's it's typically under which the identity of the church truly resides, is that centralized piece. So that's going to be the piece that's hardest to let go of.
Yeah.
The other one is something you just slapped on kind of recently and you gave it a good try. Oh, it was really hard. And some people might keep kind of putting something into it, but we're not going to give a lot of our attention towards it.
I think one thing about the hybrid that sometimes you don't realize is an issue until you start is how confusing it is. The confusion of what you're communicating and trying to move people towards. I'll never forget. I'm in both worlds, right? And I got up one Sunday and I was teaching on something about the church, what it means to be the church, how it's active, it's participatory, it's not based on a few. Everyone should be able to use their gifts. And I'm going through 1 Corinthians 14:26. Brothers, when you gather together, each one of you has a hymn, a song, a tongue, a teaching, all for the building up. And I will never forget. I didn't say this out loud, but I got done reading that verse in 1 Corinthians 14 aloud, and I thought in my mind, well, that doesn't look anything like what we're doing right now. In fact, we're doing the exact opposite. I'm using my gift, and everyone's sitting passively by here. They're ready to consume. And so it just is confusing because you're trying to say, no, this is who we are as a church. This is the new DNA. This is the new foundation we're wanting to live into, while you continue to do that
Yeah.
on a Sunday morning in a way that communicates the opposite. It just breeds a lot of confusion.
Yeah. And it's challenging too, because obviously pastors tend to be the people who are most like bound to the centralized version. Their livelihoods depend on it.
Right.
So if you're
That's
gonna
right.
if you're gonna really push into one versus the other,
Yeah.
like when push comes to shove, like, man, you realize I could be giving up my livelihood to go step into this other one. There's the other piece of for a lot of pastors, their identity is bound up in that centralized thing that you've been laboring for a long time. And if all of a sudden this starts to diminish, a lot of people take it's as like an attack of personal pride or personal identity. That's not even to speak of some other challenges of man, if you and your wife maybe see things a little differently of how you're stepping into this, how much that can all of a sudden. So there's just a lot of different things that make doing both of these simultaneously in a harmonious way exceedingly challenging. And to the extent that some go on and they will bear fruit. They'll see some things happen, but we've not seen them get to the place of starting the movement that a lot of people really want to see.
I I don't know about you, but I found this for me and also a lot of people I'm connected with is something happens when you step out of the prevailing model. And while you're still trying to do both or transition to church, while you're still involved, you don't fully see kind of everything that maybe you need to see. And there comes to this such realization of, wow, what we were doing is pretty messed up. Again, I'm not saying it's all messed up, but you just begin to see like, wow, I was carrying this weight, or I was operating in an unhealthy way, or law was demanded me, or the whole system. Like you just see things way more clearly when you're outside of it. And in fact, now you and I have talked about it many times. Like I haven't been back into that setting much in the past 3 years, but when you're in it, you're like, oh wow, this is odd.
I think part of that is that when a person steps out to go and engage in being the church in a decentralized way, it forces them to own it.
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas before, you don't recognize how much is just given to you on a silver platter.
that's right.
There's the staff and such who are taking care of most of the burden behind the scene to give you as presentable of a thing as they can. So it requires very little of the person who shows
Well,
up.
even when you're saying that, it's like even if you're volunteering when you gather together, someone is put the order together and put everything in order, all the details needed. You just show up and do your part.
Yep. And so in this, also it's like you are forced to own it. And part of owning something also forces you to learn it. It
Yeah,
forces you to invest in it.
yeah,
It forces you to engage with it in just deeper ways. And so that's part of what I think is actually really beautiful for people who step away from the centralized version of church to go and enter into decentralized is we're not telling anybody that this is necessarily going to be easier. There will be pieces that will be harder because you're not receiving on the silver platter all the same things that you were before. So if people are thinking of engaging this because, oh, it's just going to be, it's going to be so much easier, I'd really ask you to reconsider that. But do I think it'll be so much more rich and fulfilling and all that and advancement of the kingdom and all these components? Definitely, without a doubt.
Yeah. Before we really dive into the third option that we recommend is to be sent out as a pioneer, I just want to reiterate something you said earlier is that we spend so much time trying to get these things to work together. And at the end of the day, the reality is that their foundations are different. The DNAs are different and they cannot coexist. I think sometimes like, oh, but there are hybrid things out there. There are hybrid cars or hybrid, fine. But this is like trying to make a hybrid of a dump truck and an orange. Like they don't,
Yeah, some things
you can't you can't mix it because by very nature, they actually compete with each other. And I think that's the reality that took us a long time to get to is they don't, it's not like man and woman coming together and producing amazing things. It's things that just by very nature don't jive. And I, we're trying to move to a different foundation, and that takes tearing down and rebuilding.
Yeah. So part of our reason for actually recording a conversation like this is to try to say, hey, these are things that we've learned, that we've noticed, that we've talked with many others about who are in agreement
Yeah.
with us. And we're trying to save people who are considering this from a few things. We're not here trying to be God to you and tell you you have to do this. You have to listen to God. But in a general wisdom sense, like the hybrid expression does not work. It ends up taking a lot of time. And so we're hoping to save people time. And it ends up costing people typically a lot of really broken relationships. And we're trying to save people broken relationships. We actually think there is a better way to help a group of people who are very used to traditional church mentalities to help usher them towards decentralized church mentalities. But the goal is not to try to take them all at once. And that's where the third one that we would recommend is that you would go and be a pioneer of the very thing that needs to be created.
When we talk about this pioneering, I think it's important to be very clear on what is it that you're inviting people into. Because maybe I'm going backwards, but it makes me think another issue with a hybrid is because like if it's just about I want to teach people to make disciples, you can do that to a degree in a hybrid setting, right? You can still do that in a legacy model church. But if you're saying, no, I want to teach people to walk in this newness of this intimate relationship with Jesus, to listen to his voice and respond to him and to teach others about him, that I don't know how that happens, or it's very challenging in the prevailing model.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about pioneering, we're not just like, hey, I want to teach people to go make a disciple. It's this, we want to teach people to live this life of listening and following Jesus.
And that's where it is so much different than, oh, here's the program and just here's the steps and all this sort of stuff. It's like we're trying to go and to learn a lifestyle that is actually foreign to us.
Yes.
Because we've adopted a different lifestyle, which is the traditional church lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And we're saying, wait, I don't think this is it. I'm going to step away from that lifestyle as my norm to go and engage with a different lifestyle. Now, and so that's where we would say, in any given place or city, somebody has to go and be that pioneer.
Yeah, that's right.
And for many, this is not easy work.
No.
That's why this is not the get rich quick scheme of disciple making or the get rich quick scheme of church. It's challenging in certain regards, but it's extremely fulfilling.
Yeah.
And this is why I think Jesus in so many scriptures prepares us for hardship, but yet he is present with us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like even in the midst of all sorts of hardship of being a pioneer, man, his presence is with us. His peace can be with us. His joy can be with us in the midst of of times of loneliness, of times of like being like, what in the world am I doing? All that sort of stuff. But finding that person who will pioneer and going out and in essence over time finding others whose hearts are longing for this. And that would be some people who honestly are in the harvest yet, who have yet to know Jesus,
Hmm.
that you're going to introduce them to Jesus.
Hmm.
And you're going to invite them to come join this journey with you. Or it could be those people who have sat in church all their lives and they've been thinking these same things, but maybe they just haven't dared to take a step, or they didn't know what step to take. And
Yeah.
now you get to do it together. But somebody has to go and take this step. And that's why we use that pioneer language.
Well, and I think most people, the way most people are wired, they just have a hard time imagining another way outside of what's been done for hundreds of years. And that's the case with the church, but that's the case in a lot of things, like, and I'm not saying there's something wrong with them because of it. It's just not the way that they think. And so I think it's going to take in this area, as well as any area of life, it's going to take people to say, I think there's another way.
Mm.
I'm going to go explore what this other way looks like. And by you living and modeling another way, it gives people a real tangible example to look at and go, oh, oh, that's what you were talking about. Oh, now I see how this could be done differently. But I think in theory, it's just hard for a lot of us to wrap our mind around. We need people to do it with skin on to give us a picture, real example of what it looks like.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of challenging pieces we could talk about in this, but a lot of times this isn't, we are very accustomed and used to things happening very quickly.
Oh yeah,
So we figure out how do we fill up a building as quick as possible to be the church.
totally.
And this is where a lot of this stuff that we're pouring into now is actually, we have to learn and become at peace with actually slowing down, with walking with people, with
Hmm.
caring deeply for them, and realizing our goal is not to go and just fill up a building or fill up a bunch of houses, let alone, but instead it's to actually walk with people, to see them formed into the image of God,
Hmm.
according to the scriptures.
Hmm.
And of course, that's happening with us while we're walking with others who are doing this. And we are teaching them as well as that's taking place. How do they open up their homes or their spaces? I'm not assuming everyone has a home. It could be an apartment. It could be, hey, we go meet over at this coffee shop regularly, or this restaurant is our go-to place, whatever it is. But you start walking with people, and this is where the multiplication kicks in, but multiplication is extremely unromantic at
Mm.
first,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
because 1 to 2 is multiplication, but nobody's going to look at that and say, man, that's amazing. And 2 to 4 is multiplication, but nobody's going to look at that and say, man, that's amazing.
Hmm.
But truthfully, it's just beautiful in its own right.
Yeah.
And and as that happens over time, you begin to see more people who understand this lifestyle that we're pushing into, that is just more robust, more biblical, and that starts to become normal. And then you do actually have a community around you
Yeah.
of people who, yes, you are gathering in a home together, for example, but also you are gathering from house to house.
Hmm.
And so over time, you get to look back and you get to say, wow, like the Lord is doing something here. And then opportunities arise in another city or another place. And so, I mean, we could go on about how does decentralized like this truly grow? I don't mean to go down there too far, but basically for the third model is somebody needs to go
Yeah.
and take the initiative.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. It starts very small, but I think the benefit of pioneering is that you can lay a new foundation. You're not trying to blow up an old foundation. You can bless the church that you're leaving and be sent out to pioneer something that you're laying a new foundation. But one of the most important things I think we would say to anyone listening that's considering this would be that foundation starts at the smallest and simplest level in your own home,
Yes.
and it multiplies from there. And I think as pastors, especially, we're used to like the masses. We got to get everyone to do it this way. We got everyone to understand this, and it starts out with just you modeling from your home the simplicity of your home, what it looks like to be the church in the simplest way in your home, and living out this different foundation, and then letting the Lord build upon that and multiply from there.
Yeah, and I mean this is kind of the trap of a lot of pastors, is we tend to try to go and get all the other people involved, and we leave our families and such like that just kind of as the leftovers,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know. And but everything that we've seen that is turns out to be healthy begins with a healthy understanding collectively within the home,
that's right.
within a family. And so, yeah, somebody's got to go and like pick up that machete and begin to cut that trail. Not a lot of people want to do it.
No. Well, and again, we talk to a lot of pastors,
Yeah.
and it's very costly to go do this. You're walking away from your paycheck, as you mentioned earlier. You walk away from your identity. You're walking away from relationships. You're walking away from a good reputation and respect. A lot of times, you're walking away from a world that people, for the most part, understand, and you're walking to a world that most people don't understand.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, I still have some family. They're like, "What are you?
Yeah.
What are you doing for church? Are you going to church? Are you going to a church yet?"
Yep.
And yeah, my living room. Oh, it's just like you're giving up a lot, and so we're not saying it's not costly. It's very costly, but we think it's worth the cost.
The funny thing though is that even though it is costly, I do think if our hearts are able to be oriented appropriately, it still though is more peaceful and more joyous.
Oh,
You know
I
what I
mean,
mean?
oh
Like
yeah, oh
it's
yeah,
like, but our hearts have to be oriented
yeah,
appropriately.
yeah.
And if our hearts aren't, then actually it's going to be it comes back again to not dealing with the foundations of your own heart from a previous model into this model. Like your own heart has to change and be willing to repent. And if you don't, it's going to be really hard.
Yeah, I think a lot of the pastors that we work with, this is what those costs they face kind of initially, but once they work through those, I've never had one pastor. Now, time will tell,
Yeah.
but I've never had one pastor that's like, I missed that. I'm going to go back to being a pastor in the prevailing model. I've never had it. Have you?
I've not had it. I've not had it with people who have engaged in what we're talking about now for a, a fair season.
Okay.
Okay. I've had those who theoretically flirt, like what I would say is theoretically
Okay.
flirted with
Okay.
it and then gone back, but not those who have actually gone and engaged with it.
Pastors are just like average folk in the church.
I'm thinking of one pastor specifically.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I would think mainly for a lot of pastors, it's like it's just so costly to make the step
Yep.
that there's just a great conviction there. So to
Yes.
go back doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So that's why, honestly, a lot of pastors won't go and a lot of pastors won't even allow a pioneering to take place because part of pioneering is that it gives autonomy.
Yeah.
So the autonomy fights against some of those foundational problems
Yeah.
of control,
Centralization.
centralization,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yep.
And so, but now when you have somebody who's willing to go and pioneer, this to me gets to that previous thing. Once you start like cutting that trail, it does make it easier for other people to come and step behind you.
Sure does.
And so that's to me where instead of trying to bring a whole church with you on this journey through some like sort of hybrid expression or something like that, you need somebody to go pioneer, start blazing that trail a little bit. Other people from that church or whatever will begin to see and to notice, and they'll realize, man, there's a trail that's heading over in this direction. I can go and walk in that. So there's a lot of people out there who will not be the pioneer.
Yeah. Well, you said something pretty interesting that I don't want to just gloss over that a lot of pastors or elders or leaders will not support pioneers going out. And I think that's the reality. In an ideal world, your elders or pastor or whatever, they will bless you and they will send you out. And we found it helpful to think about it in terms of like, not as a church planner. Well, partly we don't see a church planner in the Bible. We see like missionaries, like apostolic leaders, missionaries, to be sent out to a new work. It's awesome when they can be blessed to do that. But I'd say it's about 50-50 because of what you're saying. The control, and also they have all these concerns about what you're baptizing people, but they're not. What about church membership? And what about Harris? I mean, all these things. And so then they just can't get to a point of blessing. And so I've heard people say, I wasn't sent out, which would be a blessed blessing. I was released to go. And at the end of the day, you can try your best. We encourage you to do that, to leave well, to receive blessing. But at the end of the day, it's the Holy Spirit that sends out. And you need to listen to the Spirit.
Yeah. And that's where I think, just to kind of summarize again, the first example that we talked about again was that blow it up. Like the pastor just wants to blow it up and then kind of head over in this direction. The second one was more of the hybrid. How do you mix these two worlds together? One pours into the other and vice versa and such. And then the third one is more of what we're saying, hey, whether you're the pastor and you're considering to pioneer, or if you're even just the person who's sitting in the pews and you're like, is this really what it's all about? Our encouragement is that third one, to say, I think it is good actually to go and talk with some of the people. You have to have a firm conviction in your heart, but to go talk with some of the people and say, this is on my heart. I'd love to be blessed by you guys to go and do this. I think it's a way to honor,
Yeah.
those people around you and such. But Britton, what you're saying, it's about 50-50 of people who will either receive that blessing to go do that, or who honestly will end up receiving resistance.
Yeah.
And that's where the conviction then has to be strong. Because we've seen it both ways. When it happens as a blessing, it can be, to me, that's actually probably the most healthy launching of movement. It doesn't create a bunch of carnage,
Right.
in its wake. It can open up relationships even further down the road more easily towards conversations and all these sorts of things. But yeah, there's a lot of churches who are very much like, this model is the model, and what you're going to step into is actually anti.
Yeah.
And so they won't bless it. In fact, we've had people who we've worked closely with who have been very demeaned.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In the midst of engaging in this.
Yeah. Too many than I would wish. But I think you're right in that. And I think that's why, if you're listening to this and you feel like, I'm alone, when you're alone in this, when that happens, you start feeling like maybe I am off biblically. And one common thing I've heard of many people get accused of, you're going rogue. Yeah. You don't want accountability. You're going rogue. And you're like, I don't think I am. But if you're alone, you start, well, maybe I am. And again, I think it's a good question to ask and check your heart in. But I think that's why, if you're alone, reach out. Like, we'd love to walk with you in this, so we can like really walk with you. And like, this is what the word says. No, you're just trying to obey the word. No, we want you to do it well and honorably and relationally. But like, no, you're not going rogue. Or just, it is such a hard journey to try. It's a hard journey on its own. Just in general, it's really hard to do it on your own. Yeah. And so that's why I encourage those that are listening. They're just like, I need some help. Just reach out. We'd love to walk with you in this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the piece of not even just us, but we now have gotten to walk with others spread throughout, the United States, and even I mean, we're connected globally too. But I'm guessing people who are going to be listening here are going to primarily be in the U.S. And such. And so there might be people around you actually,
Yeah.
who we could connect you with, so it doesn't have to feel as lonely.
Yeah.
The other thing that I just say with that real quick too is, back to your own personal heart as you're stepping in it, is guard your heart against stepping into this from a place of anger and bitterness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I do think there are bad springboards into this. And so like, man, if you have been really hurt and all of a sudden that hurt is your launching thing into this, check your heart with that. So if you're hanging on to a bunch of bitterness and anger or whatever, and that's your springboard, it's not a healthy one. And if that's the case for you, man, we'd still love to talk with you and still just say, hey, like, we understand that,
Yeah.
those pains.
Yeah, we've experienced it.
We've experienced those in certain regards and have walked with others who have. And so, but don't let that be your springboard. Get healed up with that.
Yeah.
And then find a healthy one to go pioneer from.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I think, at the end of this, out of these options, the reason why we think the pioneering is typically the best option for most people, unless the Lord tells you otherwise, is because it gets back to the ability to build on a new foundation. And it clearly isn't just trying to tweak a new machine or new program, or like, it is building something on the word and then having practices and models that best align with what the foundation of who we're called to be as disciples and who we're called to be as the church.
Yeah. So it's to me, I personally view this like we are honored to live in a time such as this, to get to live into this. It's for us as Westerners, what we're living into here, I still feel like is very foreign. So it feels like the wild, wild west out there sometimes in this landscape, but it's needed. And that's where this is also a call out to those who your heart is longing for this. Maybe you don't know exactly how to do this, but you're needed in this. And so just reach out. We don't want to go and once again be the Holy Spirit to you, but we'd love to be some people to converse with.
Thanks so much for listening today. Wherever you're at on the journey from pastor to pioneer, we would love to journey with you and support you. You can find more information and get in touch with us at pastortopioneer.com.